What's up, everybody? Welcome to DraftKings, the Slate, and boy, did we pick the right day to be here, and apparently so did you. Thanks for being with us on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, wherever you're finding us. Matt LaMarca, Gary, and Thorne. I am Adam Kaufman, and there's a potpourri of items to get into that don't even include the Bengals, I was going to say something inappropriate. They weren't good last night against the Browns is really what I'm trying to tell you. Cleveland winning that game, and the AFC playoff picture is fascinating. Maybe, just maybe, we will have time for that, as well as, of course, get to some coaching movement in the NBA. Game 3 of the World Series is happening tonight. But today, fellas, NFL trade deadline, which typically is a very, very boring day of the year. It's kind of a faux sports holiday, if you will, on the NFL calendar, at least. Not today. A record 10 trades made, including some big names. Just to give you a taste, I won't run them all down, but some of the players that moved. You had TJ Hawkinson. That was the first big one of the day, going from the Lions to the Vikings. Irv Smith is now going to miss much of the rest of the year, if not the remainder of the year. He's on injured reserve. Chase Claypool going from the Steelers to the Bears now in draft pick moves. You had Bradley Chubb going to Miami. Chase Edmonds going the other way, the running back. He was replaced by Jeff Wilson coming over from San Francisco, which obviously is noteworthy with Christian McCaffrey being there now. Calvin Ridley, this doesn't impact this year, but he has been traded from Atlanta to Jacksonville, still suspended at least through this season. But at some point in time, perhaps he becomes the player that he once was, provided he returns. You had Zach Moss going to the Colts, the Bills getting Naheem Hines. So just a fascinating day across the NFL. So LaMarca, let's start with you, buddy. What'd you think? What was the biggest takeaway of the trade deadline?
My biggest takeaway is how low our expectations for the NFL trade deadline are. I mean, you just got so excited to mention Zach Moss.
I did.
So excited.
Did.
No, I mean, it was a busy day by NFL standards. Did this day change anything as far as like title odds? No. If you look at the DraftKings futures leaderboard, I don't know if a single team moved up or down. So it was, there were some things that were done. Teams got better, but ultimately, I still think it's pretty much status quo as following the trade deadline.
And we can show people the odds on the DraftKings Sportsbook, and obviously the favorites remain the favorites. The Bills plus 225, the Eagles, the Chiefs, they're your top three, and then you have quite a drop-off before you get to the Niners, the Cowboys, and so on and so forth. What about you there, Gary? And are you any more enthused about today's movement than LaMarca?
I mean, again, it was a lot of trades. I would say maybe the most impactful one doesn't have a lot to do with fantasy. So that's not immediately the best conversation starter, but I was definitely surprised by just the number of trades, whether or not they actually had all that much to do with this season. That is definitely a conversation that we could have. I think even when you start looking at like the Calvin Ridley trade and to a lesser extent the Chase Claypool trade, because obviously he's going to be able to play the final 9 games of the season for the Bears. But really that was a trade that said more about the Bears kind of locking in their confidence with Justin Fields than it did with anything happening in 2022. So yeah, I wouldn't say today's moves really changed all that much, but kudos to the NFL for a day that the NBA definitely could have won. The sort of like who had the most engagement online. Yeah. I think the NFL did try to do their part with some trades today.
Well, look, we know I like to tweet, so maybe I'm just a sucker for push notifications with all the movement, all the deals that were coming down, the sort of dueling reports of who was going to have it first between Schefter and Rappaport. So yeah, I'm entertained by trade deadlines, even I guess today in the case of the NFL. I guess I would tend to agree that there wasn't this monster, sort of thing that says, okay, well, all of a sudden we've got a brand new fourth legit team in the NFL. It's still really kind of the big three that I outlined before, a whole lot of teams that are kind of the same, and then a few bad teams as well. But did you feel like, Gary, and you're certainly, even with your bias, being a Dolphins fan, with the moves that with Bradley Chubb going to Miami, and I know Lamarca doesn't feel like running backs mean anything in the NFL, and there's certainly a case to be made for that. But I do think Jeff Wilson is maybe better than he gets a little bit of credit for. He's no Christian McCaffrey. Obviously, that move made sense in that way. But I do like Jeff Wilson as a player. I like him a lot better in the running back situation they had there in Miami. Is there any chance that the Dolphins can vault themselves into a true contender conversation?
Well, I think first and foremost, we need to say that Dolphins bias does not work like most biases. Me being a Dolphin fan doesn't mean I'm more inclined to believe the Dolphins are doing well. It means I'm more inclined to believe the Dolphins are doing poorly.
Okay.
So I'm far more pessimistic about the team than I would say your average person is. But no, that was the trade that had actual bearing for this season. And again, I don't think the Dolphins have a chance at competing with the Bills or the Chiefs of the world, but there's a pretty large opening for the, quote unquote, third best team in the AFC. And whether or not that has any actual meaning, because again, I just think depending on how the seeding works out, we're going to have Bills Chiefs kind of decide this conference in the playoffs. They needed a pass rusher. They needed someone who could actually win without them sending their zero blitzes they love so much. They've been playing the entirety of this season without one of their, $20 million cornerbacks, and it doesn't seem like Byron Jones is coming back from his Achilles injury anytime soon. So, they needed someone to pair with Jalen Phillips to actually get some pressure, and maybe they don't have to send 6 or 7 guys and leave themselves open to these large chunk plays they've been giving up for the entirety of the season. Jeff Wilson's fine. Obviously, Mike McDaniel has a history with Jeff Wilson. He was coaching him in that San Francisco offense for years. I think it's more important just to have someone capable behind Raheem Mostert. For as good as Mostert's looked this season, we all know the book on Raheem Mostert. He's made of glass. Like, that injury is seconds away anytime Raheem Mostert touches the ball. So sure, clearly the Broncos wanted some insurance in their running back room. So you send away Edmonds and you bring in another guy like Jeff Wilson. It's just about having a warm body, really. So I think from that capacity, that's how that deal moves the needle. But no, again, in a this season perspective, the most important deal made today was Bradley Chubb. And you saw that in compensation. He was the only player traded for a first round pick.
Let's spin it this way then, Lamarca. If you're looking at, if you don't believe that any of these moves today impacted who's going to be playing in the Super Bowl in a matter of months, from a DFS standpoint or a season-long standpoint, obviously, what player do you think benefited the most from movement today? Whether that's a guy who was on the move and has a new home, or someone getting out of the way and opening up an opportunity in a current place.
Yeah, I think the answer for me pretty clearly is George Pickens. Chase Claypool trading teams. Congratulations. He's now going to play for a team that's thrown the ball about 40% of the time this season. It's kind of a head scratching move to me on the Bears part. You're clearly in the midst of a rebuild. I don't know why you'd want to give up a second round pick. I get it. You want to give Justin Fields a better chance of succeeding, but he's looked pretty good the past couple of weeks, and it's mainly because he's been doing it with his legs. So Chase Claypool, I didn't really love that trade, but it does open the door now for George Pickens to be sort of an every down player in Pittsburgh. We've seen him flash his talent at times this year, some highlight reel catches. And now that he should get more opportunities, I would say pretty clear stock up for him.
Gare Bear, same question to you.
Yeah, I mean, Pickens is probably the guy who's the most obvious beneficiary for a lot of the reasons Matt just laid out. I mean, he's someone who's flashed a little bit the last couple of weeks, even playing next to Claypool and splitting snaps with him and Deontay Johnson. Aside from that, I mean, I think it's very minuscule gains for some of these guys. It's a clear downgrade for Nyheim Hines. I just think it's going to be kind of a mess there in Buffalo. Yes, he's going from a team that, is implied for the highest point total almost every single week in the NFL, from a team that could not score a touchdown to save its life. But at the same time, you had Hines in almost a perfect situation for a pass catching running back. I guess, Matt Ryan no longer the starting quarterback for the Colts, but that was really when he was at his best, because Matt Ryan was more than willing to check down to the running backs 25 to 35% of the time during the course of a game. Josh Allen's not doing that. They're pushing the field. They're going to their wide receivers. And I feel like Hines' skill set and Devin Singletary's skill set really kind of overlap. So, I mean, look, for the Buffalo Bills, you're at the point where you're not thinking about the fantasy ramifications of this. You're just stockpiling talent. So I do like this move for them. It's never a problem to get another talented running back in the pass game. And again, Buffalo has shown time and time again, they are more than willing to completely abandon the rushing attack, which, you know, if you talk to anyone who's into NFL analytics, is something very, very commendable. They are just like, who needs to establish the run when you throw as well as we do? So I do kind of like them tooling up in that regard. But yeah, a lot of this running back stuff, it's like, all right, so Jeff Wilson Jr.'s out. Elijah Mitchell's not going to be back until maybe like week 10, week 11. So, you know, Christian McCaffrey maybe goes from having a 75% snap share to an 85% snap share, but it's not like you needed Christian McCaffrey's value to be any higher than it already was. So I'm just not sure that anyone actually traded today really has all that much fantasy value because, you know, as Matt laid out, you're probably your best quote unquote fantasy player this season who was involved in the trade was Claypool, but he's now going into an offense that is almost terrified to throw the ball. And when their quarterback does drop back, his best course of action seems to be scrambling. So he's probably the one quote unquote in Chicago now. I think he is going to get a higher target share than Darnell Mooney, but that doesn't really mean all that much when you're playing for the Bears.
How about Lamarca? Maybe it's just because it was the first trade of the day and the first big name of the day, but TJ Hawkinson going from Detroit to Minnesota, you know, he's not the best tight end, obviously, in the NFL, but he's one of those rare guys that is capable of having best tight end of the week type performances. With him going to the Vikings now, which certainly is a better offense in terms of individual talents than what he had there in Detroit, does his workload change it at all? Does his target share change at all? Or is he just sort of sliding in and taking what was going to Irv Smith now that he's out?
I'd say it's a pretty lateral move for Hawkinson. You know, maybe he does get a few more scoring opportunities, you know, opportunities in the red zone, that type of thing. But I think he's obviously going to be behind Justin Jefferson from a target perspective. Who is arguably the best receiver in football. And Adam Thielen, while he's not the same player he was in his prime, he's still a capable number 2. So I would say that, you know, wherever he was tight end 7, 8 before this trade, he's probably in a pretty similar spot afterwards.
So I guess overall, guys, as we sort of project ahead and obviously on the heels of what we saw last night as well, which was just another what's so fun and funny and frustrating and all of it for this league. It's what makes the NFL what it is the parity, obviously, you know, week to week. You know, you can look at it and say, well, they're not a contender, but week to week, you truly have no idea who's going to win a lot of these games. I mean, we've had some pretty significant upsets over the course of this season, Gary, and to have Cleveland knock off Cincinnati last night, which I think took a lot of people by surprise, especially the Bengals being what they were last year versus what we're seeing this year and sort of the teams they've beaten versus the teams they've lost to. Again, just the week to week trying to make sense of this team. Has your outlook on the AFC in particular evolved at all? Or is this really just, as you alluded to earlier, it's Buffalo, it's Kansas City, and then it's everybody else?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that's what it is. Now, you know, sort of the Bengals are that prototypical team, and we saw this play out last season of, you know, this is why you fight to get into the playoffs, because once you're in the playoffs, who knows what can happen? This is a single elimination tournament. You could be the Cincinnati Bengals, but, you know, the Bengals are kind of like the Atlanta Hawks of 2020. Like, cool, you made a Super Bowl. That's awesome. But you kind of made it out of the sequence of events that probably should have happened. Like, you jumped a step. And now all those expectations that you might have had in year 3 with Joe Burrow become even higher than they probably should have been. And we've seen this with the Atlanta Hawks, where they just weren't that team. They happened to get there. You know, a couple things broke their way. They got to play the Knicks in the first round of the playoffs. That helps. But like the Bengals, I think this is kind of what they are. Like, I'm not shocked that they're 4-4. I'm not shocked they've had some terrible losses. You know, they've got major flaws. They're not the greatest defensive team in the world. They're all right. Their offensive line is horrendous. Like, these things are going to happen. And then, I don't want to put too much stock into losing Jamar Chase, but I will say a wide receiver is infinitely more valuable than a running back in the current NFL. And, when you have these flaws already, then you lose far and away your best offensive player. It's going to have an impact regardless of how deep you are. And again, I was on this show Thursday talking about how the Bengals are equipped to deal with the loss of Jamar Chase. And they are. They've got good wide receivers, but they've got other problems. So I think with the Bengals being just pretty run of the mill, with the Ravens consistently kind of, again, I think I believe in the Ravens more than most people, but they've obviously had their issues in the fourth quarter this season. I think it really is only elevating the Bills and the Chiefs and really separating them from that, secondary pack of AFC teams even more, because there's just no one who I think stacks up with those two teams at all. So when you see a result like last night, you're sort of reminded that there really isn't this like amazing second class of the AFC. You just have those two teams and everybody else.
So, LaMarca, it's good that Garion said all that, because I wanted to ask you, I'm watching that game, and offense wasn't the only issue. The defense wasn't good against Cleveland either. Jacoby Brissett has, one of the games of his life. But as I'm watching that team and just, knowing what Chase is capable of, the numbers he's put up, the chemistry, the relationship, all of that with Joe Burrow, I guess I just kind of look at it and say, yeah, like Higgins has the potential to be great. Boyd has the potential to be great. Hurst can be a weapon. Chubb and obviously just there's a lot there clearly, but at the same time, or Mixon rather, but I wonder if you don't have Jamar Chase, can you even read into anything that they're doing? Like, do these games without Chase mean anything?
You can. Does Jamar Chase play left tackle all of a sudden? The answer is no. We know the Bengals. The formula for beating them is very simple. Pressure Joe Burrow and take advantage of their subpar offensive line. And guess what? A team with Myles Garrett and Jadeveon Clowney has a pretty good chance of doing that. And that's what they did. They controlled the game with their defensive line. And also, they were only 3-point favorites in Cincinnati. It's not like this was a monster upset.
Sure.
The Browns are a competitive football team. And I think they match up very well with the weakness of the Bengals. So in weeks where they are facing teams that don't have good pass rushes, I expect this offense to be completely fine, even without Jamar Chase. The issue, the flaw for the Bengals the whole time has been their pass blocking. And, Gary mentioned the playoffs last year. Like, I always think back to that game against the Titans when the Bengals were sacked Joe Burrow was sacked 9 times in that game. And they lose that game if Ryan Tannehill doesn't have one of the worst performances that any quarterback has ever had in the postseason. So I do think that when you look at it that way, like, this team is ahead of schedule to an extent, but their one issue, their big Achilles heel is just that they cannot block premier pass rushers. And they're going to have to shore that up if you want to contend with a team like the Bills, who have no flaws.
LaMarca, how'd we do this week? We're 8 weeks into the NFL season. What's the record now?
Well, we had another 3-2 week. So I was, 28-7. So
that's
now we are 31-9.
Damn.
People got to be tailing these picks, man. We keep telling them.
Well, I will say very fortunate to escape with the 3 last week, because we were on Green Bay. That was sort of the deciding factor of whether it was going to be a winning week or a losing week. And I had no confidence that the Packers were actually going to cover that game, but thankfully they managed to pull that out somehow. So
I won't obviously put any pressure on you right now. It's late in the day Tuesday, and assuming you're back on the show with us on Friday, then we will get your official picks for the weekend. But what are some of the early things that you're looking at right now that do jump out at you?
Early one for me is going to be the Commanders getting 3.5 at home against the Vikings. I faded Minnesota last week with the Cardinals. It was one of my 2 losses. I feel fine about that process, though. The Cardinals had plenty of chances to put that game away or at least cover the spread. And They had too many turnovers. They had a muffed punt. They had a turnover on downs. I don't think this Vikings team is nearly as good as their 6-1 record. I'm happy to grab 3.5 points with the Commanders in that spot. Another game I'm looking at is going to be the Buccaneers laying 2.5 against the Rams. I think that the Bucs are probably a bit undervalued at the moment. I think the Rams have the potential to just be a complete disaster at this point. I know the Bucs lost last week against Baltimore, but they were competitive in that game. You know, they led at halftime. It was only a 6-point game or so heading into the fourth quarter, and things just kind of got out of hand late. Lamar Jackson did what Lamar Jackson does. The way this Rams team has played this season, I think the Bucs deserve to be favored by more than a field goal in this spot.
So we shouldn't read anything into Tom Brady going as the Grim Reaper for Halloween, with the Grim Reaper knocking out at his playing door anyway.
I didn't know that. That's hilarious, but no, I would not be reading too much into Halloween costumes.
Gary, and how about you? I don't know how closely you've taken a look at Week 9, but anything that you're liking so far in the DraftKings Sportsbook?
Yeah, I mean, I would say my early leans are probably, for as much as it pains me to back the Packers in any capacity at this point, the Lions pass defense is horrendous. And I think even Aaron Rodgers, at whatever stage of his career Aaron Rodgers is currently at, can do enough to pick apart just, again, a Lions secondary that might be the worst in the NFL. This defense is just not constructed to be at all competitive. And I think that the Packers, they're not going to fix all their problems in one game, but I think this could be one of those weeks where they destroy the Lions like we've seen time and time again. And then it's suddenly like, oh, did they find something? Are they fixed? They're not fixed, but they beat up the Lions because they could. Speaking of the deadline and the immediate impact it could have, I do like the Dolphins -5 against the Bears. I mean, it's a pretty heavy line for a road favorite. However, the Bears have the worst offensive line in football, and it's not even particularly close. Their adjusted sack rate is almost 15%. Second place is hovering around 11%. So this is going to be like the immediate return on investment game. Bradley Chubb might have like 3.5 sacks, and it's suddenly going to seem like he's the greatest pass rusher in the history of the world, when honestly, the Bears just have the worst offensive line we've seen in the last 2 decades. So especially considering how poor that defense looked against Dak Prescott last weekend, I think the Dolphins can score some points, and I just don't think the Bears can keep up. So I would say the Dolphins, the Packers, and heck, even if we want to just keep going with road favorites, I legitimately think the Bills just crush the Jets. Like, I don't think it's going to be 13's a big line. And look, the Jets defense is legitimate. I think their defense is actually very good. But with the issues and the injuries the Jets have on their offensive line right now, Matt mentioned this earlier, and this was kind of like the idea the Dolphins were trying to capture with their trade for Bradley Chubb today. If you can get pressure with 4 guys, you immediately become a different type of defensive team. And the Bills never blitz, and yet they still get to the quarterback more than almost any team in the league. Tre'Davious White also activated off the PUP list. I don't know if he's going to play this week, but that is obviously very good news for the Buffalo Bills, and just a way to help out that secondary, which right now is maybe the only weakness they have because of those injuries to the safety position. But yeah, Zach Wilson going up against this Bills defense, good luck. It is going to be horrendous.
Yeah, I mean, he got owned in the second half by the Patriots defense, which is not nearly obviously.
Also a good defense. You're fine. Yeah. Your offense is abominable. Your defense pretty good.
We're gonna start a position. We're gonna put some moms in the stand for Zach on Sunday.
Inspire him. Hey, let's try something.
Maybe they just got to start playing Stacy's mom over the loudspeaker. Every time that he's sitting on the bench waiting for an opportunity to go out there, just grab him. Unintended. Talking about Green Bay and Tampa, and we're halfway through the season, long way to go, obviously, but just sort of some of the future warning signs, like I talked about Brady being near the end, and clearly he is. He's 45 years old. But I think what's interesting in watching these guys, talking about Brady and Aaron Rodgers throughout this year, is, Brady, like, neither team is good. Neither quarterback has been particularly good. I feel like Brady however marginally, has been better. More of his issues, you can attribute. Well, I think more of his issues can be attributed to, the putrid offensive line, the injuries of the key wide receivers around him, like you could.
I mean, Rodgers doesn't have any wide receivers.
Well, but the Packers.
But that, I guess that's kind of my point. Like watching Rodgers and Green Bay, it was in primetime this week, right? Watching them the other night was, I asked this question of Twitter, and I got kind of mixed results in terms of what the answer to the question was, which was, he lost. You're talking about the two-time defending NFL MVP, elite the last couple of years, late 30s. So he's not a spring chicken. He has lost Devontae Adams, who is, you talked about Justin Jefferson before, another guy who's arguably the best receiver in the NFL. Is Aaron Rodgers what we're seeing from him because he's got nothing around him, or is he just washed? And I'm not sure you can make a compelling case either way, but I'll leave it to you guys to try.
But I'm just curious. So are you saying that Brady's not washed? Like, are you saying right now it's Brady? The only reason Brady's been bad is because of the injuries? I'm just saying, like, Rodgers didn't even have these things to start with. They weren't like it was taken away from him. There hasn't been anything.
But it was because he had Devontae Adams last year and now he doesn't. Like,
sure, and Tom Brady had an offensive line last year. Like, what? I don't understand what your argument is called.
Right. And because I feel like Brady is still putting up semi-respectable numbers, whereas, Aaron Rodgers is doing absolutely nothing right now. Again,
here's
neither guy's been
in my eyes. Here's the difference in my eyes. Aaron Rodgers and the Packers, and I don't know if it's him, I don't know if it's the coaching staff. Like last week against the Bills, it legitimately felt to me like they were kind of giving up. Yeah. Like they were down 17 points running the football, throwing little swings and check down passes. It's like you used to think when Aaron Rodgers had the ball down 17 points, like you're still alive. That's only a couple possessions. They just, I don't know. Something seems off, that the fight isn't there. And we know that Rodgers is kind of this mercurial, vindictive guy. Like it would not be surprising to me if he has just kind of mailed it in.
I would definitely say, like, if you're asking me who still cares about football more, Tom Brady by 700%.
Yeah, I mean,
that's not
a way his marriage over football.
Yeah, so maybe that's the reason why, like, his slow progression into washed has looked slightly better than Rodgers. But at the same time, like, I think we've really found out this season. And again,
I don't think Rodgers is washed, by the way.
I also don't think so. I just think he doesn't care.
I don't want that out there. I think if you told me right now, I could have either Aaron Rodgers or I could have Tom Brady, I would take Aaron Rodgers still. I'm just saying that with the way that their systems are constructed, like I think Rodgers has kind of said, you know what, this ain't our year. And he's fine with just riding it out.
I agree 100%. And that's what I'm saying. I think what we've discovered this year through some of the like what was the defining story of the NFL offseason? It was some teams deciding that the wide receiver market was getting too crazy and other teams deciding that, hey, we need to surround our maybe mid-level quarterback with help, particularly in the wide receiver position. And it's like I was saying with Chase, like I will sit here all day and say the running back position does not matter. The wide receiver position does matter in the NFL. It really does. And having those guys who can beat, can create separation and can take on double teams and still win. Like that's so crucial to how these offenses are constructed nowadays, because again, it's far more efficient to pass the football than it is to run the football. So you've got a situation where like, AJ Brown is helping Jalen Hurts flourish. Tyreek Hill is helping Tua flourish in Miami. I mean, look at the receiving core the Packers had in that game against Buffalo. Like, once you lose Allen Lazard, who already, like, his best asset as an NFL wide receiver was he's an elite blocking wide receiver. He's fine catching the football, but like he was never supposed to be a wide receiver one. You lose him, you lose Randall Cobb, who like, at least it seemed like Rodgers was kind of having fun throwing to him in like a, well, I know him sort of way. Like, I mean, yes, I know the Bucs have had some injuries this season, but Tom Brady has still mostly played these games with one of or both Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. Russell Gage has been healthy for most of the season. Julio Jones came back this week. Like, I don't think it's up for debate who has better weapons. Like, it's clearly the Bucs. Their offensive line
touchdown pass to Yaya Toure last week. Shout out Manchester City.
So yeah, I don't know. Like, look, they've both been bad. I don't know. I don't need to sit here and be like, one's been slightly less bad than the other, but look, I don't think like one situation is, no, actually I do. I think Green Bay's a worse situation. I think that's really what this comes down to.
We've got 10, 12 minutes left. I still want to get to a little bit of baseball. Game 3 of the World Series tonight. I'm certain these guys have thoughts. Gary and certainly has thoughts, but you'd made the joke earlier about like who was going to win the day, NFL trade movement or the NBA, because NBA drama, like that's king, man. Social media lives for NBA drama. And we had, it was sort of mixed reporting or sort of scattered reporting over the course of the day. So Steve Nash, first it's announced he's fired by Adrian Wojnarowski, and then he follows up and Shams with a tweet that it was a mutual parting. Nash puts out a statement. He's gone from the Brooklyn Nets is the bottom line. He should have been gone earlier. Wasn't doing a good job, was butting heads with his stars. You've got them barely caring to begin with. And now it's going to be Ime Udoka, despite like Matt Barnes once upon a time saying this guy may never coach in the league ever again. It wasn't long ago that Adrian Wojnarowski, a month plus ago when all that drama was starting with Boston, where Udoka got suspended for this entire season by the team, not the league, that Woj said, watch out for a midseason move to the Nets, to the Sixers, if they make a move with Doc Rivers. Well, he's going to Brooklyn. It's not official. Sean Marks, the president there, was asked about it, and he's staying away from it. We haven't made any decisions, but it's going to happen. Ime Udoka let out of his contract by the Celtics. He's going to the Brooklyn Nets, where he was once an assistant, trying to put all these pieces back together in what is clearly a turbulent environment and guys that are entitled and are underachieving, and much like the Lakers in a very different way, kind of a dumpster fire, and the Celtics just cutting bait with Udoka. It's the Joe Mazzulla show now, while the C's are getting eviscerated on social media for not getting any compensation whatsoever for Udoka, who obviously guided that team to the NBA Finals last year. So, Lamarca, you being more of an NBA guy, let's start with you here. Does it change anything for Brooklyn in particular? Because if you look at the DraftKings Sportsbook, the Nets, they're still a top 5 NBA favorite because, again, usually talent is king in the NBA. What does this mean?
Very little to me. I think, Udoka, like, yes, he led the Celtics to the finals last year. He had a lot of talent to work with. I'm not convinced that he is the guy that's going to fix all the issues that the Nets have. And by the way, the biggest issue that the Nets have is still Ben Simmons. I said that on my last show that I was on with Mr. Glasheen. But until they can figure out how to fix or move Ben Simmons, they're going to be playing 4-on-5 offensively. And when two of those players are Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant, you're still going to be okay on some nights, but particularly if/when they get to the playoffs, you just can't win when you have one guy on the court that opposing defenses are paying no attention to. And Ben Simmons legitimately looks scared to shoot at this point. I mean, he's averaging less than 6 field goal attempts per game. He's averaging like 6 points per game. He may pass out one of these games at the free throw line. God forbid he ever has to go there again. Like, I don't know. I don't think they can win with Ben Simmons. That's my take at the moment. It doesn't matter if Udoka coaches Phil Jackson or you, Kaufman. Like, they're in trouble as long as
well,
Ben
right
Simmons
hour back out of the ground.
Yeah.
Have him coach this team. Yeah. Gary, any other than just the entertainment value of it all today, any thoughts on all this?
I mean, I don't know if I would call what the Nets are doing the last couple of days entertaining. It's kind of just sad. But
I wonder if they know. You'd have to imagine they know the full scope of what is up with Udoka, right?
Well, I mean, you'd better have vetted that situation as fully as
I was going to ask you,
possible.
Koff. I mean, well, here, let me. My quick take on the Nets as a basketball team is this: like, obviously, the comparison to the Lakers, just because of where these two teams have been this season and how much notoriety they have in the media, is pretty obvious. But I would say at least they bring shooting upside to the table. Like, even if your Simmons to Westbrook corollary is pulling a lot of weight between these two teams, like Anthony Davis and LeBron still are below average shooters from beyond the arc, whereas Durant and Irving can stretch the floor. Maybe Joe Harris, by mid-season is kind of looking like Joe Harris again. You've got Seth Curry when he's, maybe also gets healthy. Like at least there's a little bit of like spacing and some of this makes sense. And Udoka could have some things to work with on offense. But yeah, I think the interesting thing to me is it almost seemed like more details were coming out. Like I was learning things about the Udoka situation that I hadn't seen
that the
yet.
Boston media is ready to
just like it seemed like they'd been sitting on things until he was gone. And
can't wait. Yeah, so can't wait for the leaks to really happen.
But even like I'm pretty sure I hadn't seen stuff like he, the sort of like inappropriate messages to like.
Oh, that's been out there.
Has that already been out there? Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just feels like.
But again, we here in Boston have been glued to this stuff. Like it's like air to breathe for a while.
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. But I do think this next week, like the tea is going to be spilled in a big way, and it's. I don't know if it can get uglier in Brooklyn, but
that would be something if they then have to fire him immediately after hiring him. Oh,
do you think?
You think that they would know the full scope of it?
Yeah,
so.
I'm truly like I'm fascinated by the introductory press conference with Ime Udoka and what that because no one's going to be asking about the basketball team, at least not for a little while. And who was it? I think it was maybe Matt Moore who had a tweet, or someone had a tweet, saying like this is a real situation that like Udoka could be asked like we'll get to Kyrie Irving and his promotion of anti-Semitism, but first we want to talk about your situation.
Really is wild.
I was going to say it's not going to be this press conference isn't going to be all that different from every Kyrie post presser we've seen in the last week. Like it's anarchy. It's insanity.
It's pure anarchy. That's a great word for it.
So I'll, in the interest of time, we'll do this part quickly, but did the Celtics, to the degree that we know, and maybe there's more to this story than we're aware of this aspect of the story, LaMarca, but did the Celtics make a mistake not getting anything for Udoka and simply saying, okay, like we don't have to pay you anymore, see you later?
I think that, again, we don't know, but like he has not reached the level of a coach that I think it warrants compensation. For all that they did ask for it, and the Nets said, okay, no, we won't pay it. We'll just go get someone else.
Yeah.
And then they were
not keeping the guy around forever.
You can have him. Just take him. Get him out of here.
Yeah, like people were getting upset, like because I know the obvious thing in Boston right now is like, oh, we got a first for Doc.
Right.
I mean, that's such a different situation.
Such a different situation.
Like, oh my God, the amount of like, sure, Doc Rivers has baggage, but not in the same way. Not in the same way.
Well, also,
at that point in time, Doc was considered, one of the best coaches in the league.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And it was, this guy wants out of his contract because he doesn't want to coach you anymore and go through a rebuild. How's that worked out for Doc? But that's another situation. This is like, you're getting a pariah coming over and coaching your team, who the Celtics are just happy to get off the payroll. Like, oh, we don't have to fire him and pay him all the money that he was due. He's just going to leave and we can get this money back. Okay, good luck, Brooklyn, because as you guys have talked about, I don't think this as going to the NBA Finals last year, that was great. And look, we loved what he did as a head coach. I don't think this guy's going to solve your woes. So, Godspeed. Best of luck.
This entire Nets, dynasty is not the right word because they haven't won anything. This entire Nets
saga.
Saga's the word. Saga's the word. Started with Kyrie Irving basically saying, well, we don't need a head coach anyway. So maybe they should have tried that for a little while, maybe they should have just left the position open.
Player coaches. We've seen it work in the NBA before. Bill Russell won a couple of championships doing that for the Celtics back in the day. All right, let's mix in some baseball before we do get out of here. And, finally, it's time for game 3 of the World Series here between Houston and Philadelphia. It's in Philly, Lance McCullers and Ranger Suarez. And you've got Houston, despite being the team on the road, favored in this game. Gary, and what's the outlook?
Look, McCullers has been fantastic so far in the playoffs. He was pretty fantastic in the regular season too, if we're being honest. I think he kind of exceeded expectations, at least my own expectations, for someone who had been on the IL as long as he was. And he's also a pitcher who doesn't really pitch off his fastball all that much. So, there were some concerns and some reports when he was in his tune-up starts in the minors that cutter wasn't, popping the gun and popping the glove at the same rate it had been before, but that pretty much seems to be solved. And, he's almost a guy, he's not Clayton Kershaw, obviously, but he really does pitch off his curveball, particularly to left-handed batters. So, he's someone who can kind of survive a velocity loss like that. But obviously the Phillies are in a better situation with Ranger Suarez starting this game as opposed to Noah Syndergaard in a vacuum. But the Astros are 40-11 the last 51 games they've faced a left-handed starter. They are 26-5 the last 31 times they faced a left-handed starter on the road. This is a team with a 124 WRC plus against left-handed pitching for the season. The Astros were designed in a lab to mash southpaws. And I just look at this and say, yeah, the rain might benefit the Phillies in the short term. Like, you get to move Nola up to game 4. That's fantastic. But in this particular game, I just think the Astros are going to mash Ranger Suarez.
LaMarca, quickly, our guy Jared Carabas, maybe you baseball people out there have heard of him. He said earlier today on the Sweat that he believes whoever wins game 3 wins the series. You agree with that?
I mean, that's historically been the case. So I will say yes.
Didn't he? Wasn't it? He said whoever wins game 3 is going to win it in 5. Wasn't that the thing he said?
I mean, he may have. I don't know if he said the next team's going to win 3 straight. I'm not sure.
I think that's what he said. I think that was why it was a take.
I still like this series to go the distance one way or the other. I think these teams are very evenly matched. I agree with Gary, and I give the Astros the edge today. The one thing I will say is that I think with both teams having 2 days off, it could kind of be like an all hands on deck scenario, at least on the Philly side. Like, if Suarez is struggling, maybe they pull him very quickly. And, we know they have Syndergaard ready to go. They have all their relievers should be ready to go. So I do give the edge to the Astros. I think McCullers is really underrated as a starting pitcher, but I think this could be another close game. This should be a great series, right? We should just be enjoying it. I still think the Phillies have a chance to win, but I'm picking the Astros to win game 3.
Very good. All right. Well, we're about out of time because we got some Madden simulations coming your way that you guys don't want to miss. The first one being 6:00 Eastern, probably about 90 seconds from now. But want to thank T. Pike, our technical director, undercover boss Tom. Of course, Eamon, our producer, here with us every single day. Garion, LaMarca, I'm Adam. We thank you for being here with us and watching across all the DraftKings platforms. This show comes your way right around 5:15 Monday through Friday. Make sure you check it out. A rotation of people, but always the same great information. So again, hang out with us and we'll see you again. The Sweat tomorrow morning at 11.